This will be our final session together on the prophetic call. And today we're going to look at the call of the Apostle Paul. And unlike the four calls discussed so far, those of Moses, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel, that of Paul was described 5 times in the Bible. 3 times by Luke in Acts, and 2 times by Paul himself, 1 in 1 Corinthians and 1 in Galatians. So I'm going to have to combine those 5 stories into one. But we're going to look at the same perspectives: setting in time, setting in place, assignment God gives to the prophet, and the prophet's response, followed by several takeaways. Setting in time. The date now is AD 33. Jesus has ascended 3 years previously, and the Jewish Christian church is very slowly growing in numbers. As for the setting in place, the text says that Saul the Pharisee is near Damascus, where he has been approved to arrest and return for trial several Jewish Christians. With Paul, it seems like that heaven's holiness extends to earth an array of overwhelming light that blinds Saul. Saul immediately goes to ground, and a voice from heaven keeps him there. How does Saul respond to this bright light and voice? Unlike the other 4 prophets, Saul does not know who is talking to him. So he asks. The voice responds, "I am Jesus. And when you persecute my followers, you are persecuting me." Jesus continues, "Go to Damascus. I will let you know there what I want you to do for me." Saul was 3 days in Damascus without food or drink, processing what he had experienced. To me, this mirrors the time the disobedient prophet Jonah was in the whale. In both circumstances, the prophets learn their lesson, get turned around, and immediately do what God asked them to do. So what's Paul's assignment from God? In Saul's case, he gets his direction through a third party, who's the disciple Ananias. Ananias says to Paul, number 1, here's your sight back. You can now see. Number 2, be filled with the Holy Spirit, as was Ezekiel. I think this is some kind of special filling, something like that's given to Joshua and David to improve their leadership abilities. Like this is a filling to improve Saul's ability to give God's message. Number 3, Ananias says, get baptized, because you, as Isaiah, need to be spiritually cleansed before you can speak for me. Number 4, go. Witness for me. Tell what you have seen and heard. Tell it to the Gentiles. Tell it to kings, and tell it to Israelites. But number 5, be prepared to suffer in response to your witness. Now, this is speculative, but some of Paul's suffering could be God's judgment of Saul for what he did to several Jewish followers of Jesus. Now, 2 Corinthians chapter 12 sort of extends the call to a slightly later date. It describes a divine interaction during which God took him, that is Paul, as he had Isaiah, up to heaven. And while not coincident with the Damascus Road vision, the heavenly journey did occur prior to Paul's departing on his missionary adventures. And interestingly, what Paul saw in heaven, he never relates. But like Job, it had to confirm to Paul that God was on his throne, running his kingdom, and that Paul was one of his ambassadors. how does Saul respond to God's call? The vision that Paul saw up in heaven and the persecution that he would experience somehow relate. The vision helps Paul endure the persecution. And the persecution keeps Paul focused on the task of the day instead of longing for the heavenly mansions above. And as with Jeremiah, God promises to protect Paul at all times to ensure completion of God's work. So what are our final set of takeaways? It's Paul, the educated Pharisee, who becomes God's theology writer. Jesus' faithful fishermen serve in other capacities. Number 2, as with the other prophets, seeing God change their lives. Not having that experience, we need to rely on their prophetic words to change ours. Number 3, God did not change Paul's personality. The fiery Pharisee becomes the intense evangelist. So with Paul's call, this ends our look at the prophetic call. All these calls, they were all the same. So much in common. And yet, they were all different. Thank you very much for listening.